Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this episode of the On the Mark Financial Foreman podcast. We have a special guest today, Sara Zeff Geber, who owns a company called Life Encore. Sara, you work with some unique situations. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. My company, Life Encore, is actually not very descriptive of what I'm doing now. My work in my life is all about solo aging. And if you haven't ever heard that term before, I use it to refer to older adults who don't have the support of family as they age. Traditionally in our country, as well as the rest of the world, when people get older, the expectation is that their family will help them to manage some of the difficulties that are associated with aging, whether they're physical or emotional or mental. It's family that's expected to kind of rush in and take charge of that and help with that. Well, solo agers don't have that. I started out identifying solo agers as people who didn't have children. But I now realize, with lots of feedback that I've gotten over the years, that there are other people out there who really identify as solo agers too. Maybe they're single, maybe their kids live far away, lots of different circumstances that would be descriptive of a solo ager. So essentially, again, my definition today is anyone who is aging without the support of family.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we see it a lot as well, where the adult children, if there are children, are in other states. I mean, I'm in that situation. My parents live in a different state than my brother and I do. And it definitely creates some unique challenges for sure,
Yes,
logistics
it
and
does.
otherwise.
Yes, it
So,
does.
so, and what brought you into the world of solo aging? How did you get acquainted with it?
Well, it was kind of accidental in a way. I had been doing retirement coaching for several years. And so I kind of spent my life talking to people about how they were going to manage their retirement years. Most of my contemporaries and I were in our late 50s, early 60s, and really kind of just diving into that whole thing and thinking about retirement and how we wanted to continue to have meaning and purpose in our lives. But along the way, watching so many of my colleagues and friends and some of my coaching clients struggling with trying to help their own aging parents. And I was having a glass of wine with a friend of mine one afternoon, and it was the end of the day, and she had been busy and I had been busy. And I said to her, Sandy, I haven't seen you in a long time. Where have you been? And she said, well, I've pretty much been living my life in an airplane, flying back and forth to help my mom, who's on the opposite coast. And I said, well, what's going on? Your mom was doing fine when I saw her a couple of years ago. She came out for a visit. She said, well, she's kind of gone downhill since then with regard to her own physical capabilities. And my brother and I decided we ought to help her find a more safe, more secure place to live. And so we did. But it's a long road. We had to get her moved in. We had to help her downsize. Then we had the responsibility of selling the house that she'd been living in. So I've been at it for over a year and it's not finished yet. So at one point, I looked at her and I said, Sandy, you and I don't have children. Who's going to do that for us? And that was really what got me started on this quest. I started doing some research to see just what was out there. What do people who don't have children do about their own later years? And it led me down this path. And pretty soon I decided it needed a name. The name that had been bantered about, the only name, was one that the medical community gave to people who entered the hospital, usually through emergency, and they had no next of kin. So the hospital labeled them as elder orphans. And I just
Ouch.
hated that term.
Yeah, I don't like that
So,
either.
yeah, nobody does. So I came up with solo ager and a phenomenon that I now call solo aging. So that's where it came from. That's how I got interested in it. Pretty soon it just completely took over my life and I ended up writing my book on solo aging, which kind of led me down this path.
Yeah, and I wanna hear more about the book. I wanna dive into some of the details of what sort of challenges solo agers experience, because I would imagine as I'm starting to think through all of the nuances of my own family's experience and how we're planning to navigate certain things, a lot of that just doesn't apply. So I would imagine there are
Exactly.
some very unique needs, whether it be physical, logistical, financial, estate planning. I mean, geez, it really changes almost everything.
It does. And, when I was preparing for this, I listened to a couple of your previous podcasts, and you interviewed a woman by the name of Bonnie Dibness. And she talked about the role of family in all of this. And I thought, well, it's just kind of the other side of the coin. People who don't have family, what do they do? And she talked about the struggles of family bickering with one another and not agreeing, and the parents not agreeing with the kids, and yada yada. And of course, solo agers are like, that's a blank slate.
Right.
So, but there's other challenges there. So,
And yeah,
yeah,
tell me what sort of challenges do you see most often? Because and actually let me take a step back. So your role, you coach and speak at events, and you're working primarily with communities and organizations that support seniors, not necessarily working directly with the seniors themselves. Is that correct?
right. That's correct. I don't do one-on-one coaching anymore. My mission in life these days is to raise awareness about solo aging, and I can do that better through my writing and speaking. So I speak all over the place. I speak at senior centers, I speak to Rotary clubs, I speak at well, primarily actually I speak at senior living communities. The marketing department will bring me in to do a talk for an event that they're having, and they bring in prospects that are thinking of moving into their senior living community, and I talk about solo aging. I'm a big believer in solo agers making plans to live in some kind of retirement community, and a kind of retirement community that they can afford for so many reasons. But the top of the list is because of the community, because of the community building aspects of all of that. And when you talk to people who live in those senior living communities, 99.9% of whom are very happy there, what they talk about is the community. They're there for the community. Yeah, they're there for the care too when they need it. And it's there when they need it. But mostly it's about the friendships that they make and the opportunity to continue to live a full life. So anyway, I'm kind of singing their tune, so that they
Yeah,
like to bring
no.
me in to talk to their prospects.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense because you can get the care in other places, but you can't get the community necessarily to the same
Well,
degree.
so many people have bought into the idea of aging in place. ARP kind of introduced that concept, I don't know, 15 years ago. And now I just hear so many people saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to age in place. I'm going to age in place. Well, aging in place can be successful if you have a great support system around you. And if you, I don't know what you're doing with your parents, Mark, but if your parents are wanting to age in place, that takes a lot of support, usually from adult children. You can hire that kind of support, but you're hiring people for medical support and some cases some emotional support, but generally support for your mobility, support for your ability to just do the things that need to be done around your house. That's not the same as having a community.
Right.
Family can fill in for that, but people who don't have family are going to be lacking that as they get older.
Sure. And even if they do, you have situations where people, maybe the family's not in the same state or they have their own busy lives or their children that
Yes.
they're taking care of or whatever it may be, where they may not be able to be there as often as the parent might like or want or need them to be.
So many situations like that. We have some friends that live just around the corner from us, and they have one son. And when he was about 32 years old, he had the nerve to fall in love with a Danish woman. Well, where do you think they're raising their family? Her parents in Denmark, in
Right.
Copenhagen. So my friends who are right now able to get on an airplane and fly over and visit once a year and then have the family come and visit them maybe once every other year. But how helpful is that when they really need assistance as they get into their later years?
Yeah. It's an impossible situation. The reality that and then it becomes,
Yeah.
well, if you want to age in place, you've got to bring someone in. And as the needs get more severe, the cost goes potentially through the roof.
Yes, it does. And you would know that well
Yes.
because I'm sure you have clients that have faced some of those costs. It's humongous.
We do. Yeah, people really underestimate the cost of aging in place or in a community for that matter. It's a very common issue and a lot of times people's net worth is tied up in their home. So that's where we come in
Yeah,
to help people is to access some of that equity to be able to pay for the care that they want so they don't have to shortchange the care that they ideally want and deserve to get.
right.
Just
Right.
use the most
Absolutely.
way to do it.
Yeah.
But so tell me about let's shift a little bit now. We've talked about the needs of the seniors. How do you coach communities to cater to those specific needs? What is different? What is the message that you're giving to the communities themselves to understand how to help those seniors navigate those situations?
And it's a great question. I've only started to work with the communities themselves. Usually I'm speaking to the prospects, people who are thinking about moving in. But for the communities themselves, I suggest number one, that the solo agers that move into their communities need to have support in building a community there. I always encourage them to arrange the dining hall so there are several tables that are just large tables that are open to people dining alone so they can have a kind of a smaller group. I always encourage sub communities if there are clusters of cottages or people who live on a particular floor. Encourage them to get together because building a smaller community feels more personal than what are sometimes two, three, even 400 people living in a community like that. So I encourage that. I also encourage them to have what an old fashioned term, a Rolodex. Have a Rolodex of people that solo agers can access when they need it. Uh, they often move into these communities, amazingly, without a complete estate plan.
Right.
And I encourage communities to make sure that their residents have a complete estate plan and that they know exactly who to tap if something happens. Because without adult children, sometimes that's just a blank.
Right.
And that is the most difficult challenge actually for solo agers when they attempt to put together a an estate and a care plan. I know for just my husband and I, we don't have children. And so we didn't have any obvious people to be on our advance directive for healthcare, for instance. So we have one niece on my side, we have a nephew on his side, and then we have the son of a good friend of ours who I've known most of his life. So, you kind of have to expand your horizons on who might be the appropriate people for that. So I find that that's often the biggest stumbling block for solo agers. They just can't seem to muster up the courage to ask people to do that for them. And worse yet, well, you know this, I'm sure, when people have created an estate plan and they put somebody's name down, but they never even ask that person, never
Right.
talk to that person
They have
about
no idea that they've been nominated for anything.
exactly until
Yeah.
the hospital calls them one day. So yeah, so it's having resources. There are people out there that actually one can hire to take the place of their kids. I'm in California and we have something called a professional licensed fiduciary. And the term is used a little differently. It's a noun rather than kind of an adjective, if you will, or an adverb. But instead of acting in a fiduciary capacity as you do with your clients, this is actually a professional fiduciary that acts as your agent for whatever you want to designate him or her to do. And I think other states have something similar. I'm only dipping a toe in the water recently, kind of looking into that in other states. So, yeah,
Yeah,
but
we
there are
see that.
resources out there.
Yeah, we see that often, and that's definitely a part of our network as well, because sometimes these people have financial needs as well, and they own a home, and they may want to pull some equity out, but they need the professional's advice to figure that out. But
Right.
and I think also you were touching on estate plans and how they oftentimes don't have them. I think what people think of naturally when they're thinking of an estate plan is, who am I going to give my money to when I die?
Right. Yeah,
And there's so much more to it than that. It's the healthcare directive. I mean, there's so many nuances to it. And the last thing you want to do, especially if you don't have heirs, is to end up in probate, where your estate is now being settled by the government at
right.
quite an expense. I think people also underestimate how expensive probate is. It could be
Yes.
tens of thousands of dollars easily as standard
Yeah.
legal fees and whatnot. But it's also, you don't get to direct where your whatever wealth you've been fortunate enough to build, whether it be, in bank accounts or in your home or others, you don't get to direct where that money goes to. And if you're a solo ager, let's say you don't have children, you don't have family members that you want to leave money to, at least you could say, well, I want to leave it to my favorite charity or my religious
Exactly.
organization or whatever it may be. Just, being able to direct traffic, so to speak, when you're not able to speak for yourself is a really important factor. So it's not just about where does my money go? It's what happens if I can't make a medical decision for myself. That's a huge part of the estate plan and a really
Right.
important one,
Right.
especially for solo agers, because they may not be able to designate, this quote unquote standard type of person that might be able to make those decisions for them.
Yeah, I spend some time educating people that do what you do and attorneys because I don't think they're ready for the onslaught of solo agers that are out there.
Right.
When you add in, well, the rate of childbearing has changed so much. In my parents' generation and before that, there was about a 10% rate of childlessness. And that was both by choice and some of it was by choice, actually, very little. But mostly it was because that's essentially the rate of infertility for women. But now we live in a whole different world where we have all kinds of fixes for fertility problems, but there are increasing numbers of people who choose not to have children. So between for the baby boomers, that rate of childlessness went up to almost 20%, which is just about double what it had been for all previous generations. That's a huge leap. And then when you add into that the number of, let's use baby boomers because that's the generation that's on the threshold of aging right now. When you add to that number who, like my neighbors, have children that live on the other side of the world, or even worse, children that they're estranged from or are somehow incapable of helping them for all sorts of reasons. And we're talking numbers in the low 30%.
Right.
So I know you've seen it in your practice, and more financial advisors are seeing it. More and more attorneys are seeing it big time when they're trying to help people build estate plans. And then there are the throngs of people out there that aren't seeing financial advisors or attorneys. So yeah, it's a major issue.
It is, and I agree. There's so many situations that as you're talking, I'm thinking, "Whoa, there's this, maybe the adult child has a substance abuse problem, or maybe
Exactly.
they're estranged for some reason, or they're just physically, maybe they have, some sort of disability that makes them incapable of being the caretaker." I mean, it could be a million different things. And I can imagine why that percentage is as high as it really is. Plus, the data is probably better now to be able to track
Yes.
these things than it was, 50 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it
So,
certainly is.
yeah. Okay, and so tell us about your book. I wanna hear more about it. What's in it?
Sure.
What's it about? Tell us where we can find it.
This is the book. It's called Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers, and it came out in 2018. been quite successful. I mean, I'm pretty much an unknown author, but in those 6, 7 years, it has sold over 13,000 copies. So people are getting
Amazing.
interested in solo aging. And basically, in the book, I focus on three areas. One is preparing financially. One is preparing legally, which is all the things that you and I have just been talking about. But to me, the more important one too is preparing socially, preparing to live and be part of some kind of community. So there's a big piece in the book where I talk about where you're going to live and the various options that are out there. Obviously, senior living in a fancy community is not on everybody's pocketbook.
Right.
It varies across country depending on where you live. It can be more or less expensive. And they're frankly, they're underbuilt for the number of people that are aging today. And I think that we're going to see probably a real shortage in 3 or 4 years, maybe
Yeah.
even sooner.
Well, in some cases, we're already seeing it. You see some communities that
Yeah,
have in some popular retirement areas, the waiting lists are 3, 4 years. You
yeah,
might get to the point where you're not physically capable of living in that community by the time your phone rings with the appointment, to
exactly.
move in.
Yeah, I encourage people to take a look around the community. A lot of people think about senior living. All they can envision is a horrible nursing home that their grandmother lived in.
Right.
And as you know, that industry has grown and advanced so far beyond that. Some of these fancier communities are like living in a docked cruise ship. There's just every possible activity you could imagine, every possible support system you could imagine, great food, um, swimming pools and pickleball courts and yeah, you name it. So, and then you have communities that are not quite as fancy and but they still offer the kind of community building that everybody needs. Even if you consider yourself not a joiner, um, still, I believe most people would become pretty lonely if they couldn't drive anymore, if there wasn't good public transportation, if they couldn't go meet their friends for lunch, or all of the things that we get used to doing and take for granted. Um, when that goes away, life gets pretty lonely, and guarding against loneliness and isolation are really key for all solo for everybody. But people with family have access generally to a support system. Solo agers often do not.
Right. And you mentioned also the first component that you talk about is the financial side. So of course my ears perk when I hear that part of
Yes.
it. So what sort of issues do you talk about with the financial side of?
Well, in the book, I recommend to everyone that they take at least the opportunity to have even just one meeting with a financial advisor who can take a look at their at assets, what they have to live on, what their I call it their burn rate. Are they living beyond their means right now? Um, and make recommendations. And I know that you and others like that do the same kind of work you do have all kinds of resources for doing that. You've got all kinds of uh, potential for graphing people's life expectancy and how much they're going to need to live to be 92 or 93 or 104, whatever looks like they're likely to do. And so I think that that's a huge opportunity for people, even if it's
It
just
is.
one meeting. But of course, I
Yeah, and
recommend that they get it and let a financial advisor be a guide for them in making sure their money lasts for the rest of their
right.
life.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. That's the biggest issue is how long is your money going to last? And not knowing that sometimes causes a lot of stress for people, but they're
Oh,
almost
yeah.
afraid to seek out the answer.
And
That's what we found. They don't wanna know, they just wanna hope. Hope is great, but sometimes you don't wanna hope your way into, financial
yeah,
ruin
exactly.
because also the cost of aging is not the same as it was 20 years ago when maybe your
No,
parents went through it or, I'm not saying your parents, I'm saying people's parents. The nursing home concept is kind of phased out. That's not really what it's like anymore. But also the cost is ever increasing,
Yes,
and you have to make sure that your money is going to last long enough. And if not, what do you do? But a financial advisor is a tremendously important plays a tremendously important role for
absolutely.
seniors. We are big proponents of people having all the professional advice. When we on the mortgage side, when we're looking at, a lot of times we get brought in by the financial advisor to say, well, what can we do with leveraging the home to be able to make the money last longer? Because if you're just liquidating the funds that you have saved up, but you have this home that may have, maybe this generation tends to be a buy and hold generation, where they may have lived in the homes for 30, 40, 50, 60 years potentially. And so they built up a lot of equity in the home, but oftentimes people don't look at a
Try to
home
tap
as an
that.
asset the same way they look at an IRA, for example.
Yeah,
So that's when our
absolutely.
engagement with the financial advisor is really helpful, because we're looking at it from the same perspective, but also a different perspective. We're looking at different assets that might be able to be utilized to make that money last longer. And for solo
Yes,
agers, sometimes that conversation is different because they're not as cognizant of, oh, I want to leave this asset to my child or to my grandchildren or whatever it may be. So the nuances are different for solo agers when we're engaging with
they
them
are.
than it is for someone who has a very clear path on exactly, okay, I have two kids, the money's going to get split 50-50. And then the estate plan hopefully lays all that out. But the
Don't you
financial advisor
find
is really the quarterback of all those
don't you
discussions.
find, Mark, that some people think in a very limited way about their money? Like, well, it's no problem. It's going to go 50-50 to my son and my daughter. But they don't think about planning for the extensive care as they
Right.
get older. So
And
having
it's a
that
big issue.
care plan is really important too. Thinking through the
It is.
options for later life living and
Right. And you
yeah,
have situations where family members may have had off the cuff conversations, and maybe the parent said to their child, don't ever put me in a
right.
community or I'll throw you off a cliff. But the
Or
needs were not
yeah,
the same then as they
disinherit you.
might be now. So sometimes
Yeah,
everything shifts.
yeah,
So it's never a straight line with anything when it comes to either family dynamics or financial dynamics. You have to be
yeah.
willing to shift and change your mindset a little bit. But that's where the professional teams like a financial advisor, an estate attorney, mortgage lender, if there's a property that may need to be leveraged. But all those people combined can give you all the perspectives you need. And the other issue we often see is that people sell their homes to pay for care, which may be the right decision, but you're also going to incur all of the capital gains tax that you've accrued, in equity over the time that you've owned your home. So that's a big issue right now for seniors because they've owned their homes for so long. Maybe they bought them for, $20,000 in the '60s. And now the home may be, I mean, if you're in California, not unusual to see a $2 to $5 million
2 to 3 million.
home. So those capital gains taxes can be really impactful on where your money goes, because I'm sure whether you're a solo ager or you have children or you have other people that you want to leave money to, the only group you don't want to leave money to is the IRS.
Right.
So, and we see people making that mistake often, where they don't take advantage of how the tax laws are written, of if you sell the home while you're still alive versus after you pass, you might be able to
Right.
avoid those capital gains taxes.
And on the legal side of that equation is if you don't create a care plan and name people to speak for you if and when you cannot, you can become a ward of the court. And that's a pretty ugly situation.
Yes. You don't wanna get
Yeah.
lost in the system,
You
especially when the government's running it.
you don't want to have somebody assigned to you as a conservator or as a guardian that you've never seen before and have no idea what their agenda is. And that's unfortunately that's the downside of that piece of it.
Right, of not planning, really, and
Yeah, of
that's a
not planning.
if there's a common thread for all of the episodes we've done over the years in senior living, and really others for just general financial literacy, is build the team around you and plan ahead. Those are
Plan,
2
plan, plan.
common threads that will change the entire trajectory of what happens with you. People oftentimes put it off, they put it off. But as you're aging, if you're putting those things off, you might put it off to the point where you're no longer in control of those decisions, and that's the last thing you want.
Huh.
And
Yeah,
so that's why start early, start, when you're not even really considering what your aging plan is, but start with a financial advisor or state attorney at a very young age. Even we encourage it. I actually wrote I don't really call it a book per se, but we have a workbook that we send to our younger clients who are purchasing homes. And the title of it is "You've closed, but your work is not done yet." And it talks about how, and I don't sell books, I just give this out. This is actually a gift that we give to our clients after a closing, but the whole point of it is, now you own a home, your stakes are higher, right? You need an estate plan to determine what's going to happen with that house. If something were to happen to you, you need life insurance to protect your family, make sure that they can afford to pay for the mortgage that you just took out, so they don't have to move out of the home because you're not there earning income. So it's all these components, but I'm a huge, huge fan of building that financial team as early in life as possible within reason, at least be 18. But beyond that, estate planning, all of it is so, so critical, because you never know what's going to happen. Life
you
can
don't.
take
You
take
don't.
turns and U-turns, and you want to be prepared for those things. You can't really plan for those things as they're happening. You have to do it in advance. So, Sara, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. I want to make sure people know where to find you. So,
Sure.
if they want to find the book, or they want to find you, or they think you'd be a great speaker for one of their events or opportunities, how can they find you?
Well, this is again, my name is at the bottom of the book. And if you go to sarazeffgeber.com, you'll find me. And I'm on LinkedIn, and you can get the book anywhere. There's a link on my website, but the link will just take you to Amazon, I believe. You can, if you're interested in the book, you can have your local bookseller order it. That's an easy one too. Some are carrying it these days. And any online, if you don't want to do business with Amazon, you can do business with Apple or one of the others that you can find.
That's great. Well, Sara, I really appreciate your time today and sharing your insights into a community that maybe people don't think about enough. And I applaud your interest and time and energy that goes into helping those people and all the professionals that support them. So thank you so much for all you do, and for spending time with us today to get the message out. And I hope we get you to 14,000 books or more by the time people see this episode. But either way, I think your insights are really valuable, and it's something that oftentimes people don't think about, but they should. So that's
Yeah.
the whole purpose of doing these sessions together.
Well,
So
thank you,
thank you.
Mark, for giving me a chance to enlighten some new audience members.
Exactly. The more eyes, the better for all
Yeah,
of these things, because we're all coming from a place
absolutely.
of service. So,
Yeah.
well, Sara, again, thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for joining this episode of On the Mark. And we will see you next time. Take care.